This is a Fox News alert. Polls are now closed in the Montana special election. Welcome to Hannity. I'm Kimberly Guilfoyle in for Sean tonight, who is on vacation for the Memorial Day weekend holiday, and he will be back on Tuesday. We'll have updates on the Montana special election throughout the hour. The race is now in the national spotlight after the Republican candidate, Greg Gianforte, allegedly body slammed a reporter last night. But first, our top story. President Trump on the world stage meeting with European leaders at the new NATO headquarters in Brussels. Earlier today, the commander-in-chief called on allies in the military alliance to start paying their fair share. Take a look.
That I have been very, very direct with Secretary Stoltenberg and members of the alliance in saying that NATO members must finally contribute their fair share and meet their financial obligations. But 23 of the 28 member nations are still not paying what they should be paying and what they are supposed to be paying for their defense. This is not fair to the people and taxpayers of the United States. And many of these nations owe massive amounts of money from past years and not paying in those past years.
And also tonight, British authorities resume sharing intelligence about the Manchester terror attack with their American counterparts. This comes after President Trump responded to British complaints about intelligence leaks in the United States by saying the federal government will launch a complete review. President Trump promised to, quote, get to the bottom of this. Plus, there are new questions about selective intelligence leaks aimed at damaging the Trump administration. There are new reports tonight that Jared Kushner, the president's son-in-law and senior advisor, is now under FBI scrutiny in the Russia investigation. According to the Wall Street Journal, Kushner's lawyers said he will fully cooperate. Here now with reaction to tonight's breaking news is former White House Press Secretary Ari Fleischer and American Conservative Union Chairman Matt Schlapp. Gentlemen, thank you for joining us tonight on this busy breaking news evening. Matt, I'll begin with you. What is your reaction to President Trump calling out NATO members for not paying their fair share?
Well, you know, Kimberly, it was never about making Europe great again. And I actually think it's kind of refreshing in diplomatic circles to have an American leader just be very direct and very honest. There was a period of time in our recent history where America was so dominant and so big, and we were so optimistic about our economic leadership that we could cavalierly just pay for things all over the globe and shed our jobs. And I think Trump has connected with the American people who say, you know, we've lost so much about America that it's time for us to stand up for what's in our interests. It is in our interest to have a strong NATO, but it's the right thing to do for everybody to fulfill their commitments. All
right, Ari, how do you see it?
Oh, that's exactly right. You know, it's just not right. When you sign up to belong to an alliance, and one of the terms for signing up is that you are supposed to spend 2% of your budget on defense, that way we're all strong together, and you don't do it, you're mooching, you're freeloading. You're freeloading off of the only 5 nations of the 28 who do pay. So I was very supportive of Donald Trump doing it. It's a message they need to hear. He needs to break some glass. I would have added one other element. While all 28 were standing in front of me, I'd have singled out the 4 others in addition to the United States who are paying. I just said thank you to the United Kingdom, thank you to Greece, thank you Estonia, thank you Poland, and send that signal. I'm not thanking the other 23.
You know, Ari, I want to stick with you on this for a moment. After the Manchester terror attack, you know, isn't President Trump right to continue this push for NATO to do more to fight terror? Yes. It's not just about your financial obligation, but put some skin in the game here.
Absolutely right. Think about how all of a sudden the military flooded the streets throughout the United Kingdom after this happened. And the UK does spend 2% or more on defense. But in the other nations, Germany, a wealthy nation, Italy, a wealthy nation, France, a wealthy nation, why aren't they doing it? They certainly could, but they choose not to because they'd rather spend their money on welfare programs and welfare payments, as it's part of the Western European tradition of being quasi-socialist and very expensive and lavish. Well, that means they're not paying what they're supposed to for defense, and it hurts all of us.
Yes, absolutely. Now, Matt, what do you think that President Trump's message should be tomorrow for the G7 summit?
Well, once again, I think what President Trump ran on is this idea that we're no longer just going to shed our jobs and our economic opportunity for strategic relationships and purposes. It's going to be about America standing up for what's right for America. So he's got a level set with these other first world nations about the fact that we want to do business together. We want to have free trade. We want to do commerce together. But he's going to aggressively be a cheerleader for the American point of view. Don't expect America to pick up all the bills like Ari was talking about, to be the world's patsy. We're going to do what's in our interest, and it's about time we did that. And I think that's going to be part of his message.
Certainly. You know, Ari, a lot has been discussed now in terms of the travel ban, extreme vetting. And when we think about this, what has happened here, this very horrifying example in terms of Manchester and what happened and the bombing there. People looking at this saying, wait a second, maybe President Trump, I think, is on to something in terms of look at the countries that have been impacted, the travel that allegedly this individual had back and forth from Libya, etc.
Well, I'm in a different place on this one, Kimberly. I just have to say it. When Donald Trump was a candidate, and he did call it a Muslim ban back then, I publicly opposed it. I thought it was the wrong thing to do. And now that it's revised and it's changed around, I'm still not supportive of it, with the exception of Syria, where there is no government. We can't possibly vet who's coming because there's no infrastructure to check some of these names. But for most of those other nations, I don't like that approach. I would much rather keep America being the nation that other nations, other people want to come to, and we can vet them, we should vet them, but I want America to be the nation that's the light of the world, the best nation on earth. People would want to come here, and that would include Muslims. So I'm in a different spot on that. I think you can vet, and you can do it in a way that protects our country.
Okay, but what about the commitment here to national security, Matt, in terms of making sure that this is a place, yes, this is a nation of immigrants. We've all come from different countries, our parents working, trying to come here, come to the country legally, law-abiding, and Ari's making the point essentially for the other side, which is how can you trust countries when they know they can't even determine the true identity of a person trying to come over with falsified documents? We want to be compassionate, and we want to make sure that this is a land of opportunity, but it also must be a nation of laws.
Amen, Kimberly. Here's the thing, which is America is the greatest country on the globe, and I want us to be a welcoming country. It doesn't do us any good when we destabilize our security because in the interest of some positive notion, we allow people in who could be jihadists. And I think that's what's the bottom line here, which is you have an out-of-control liberal court system which too often puts its values instead of the constitutional values on these decisions. And the fact is this, they're using President Trump's rhetoric on the campaign, which Ari alluded to, got pretty fiery in this topic, but they're using his rhetoric on the campaign to make this unconstitutional when they're not looking at the words in the law. The words in the executive order are clearly constitutional, and it's wrong for them to try to stop this and to make politics out of it. It's why people are so frustrated with government.
Frustrated also with legislating from the bench, politicizing and putting ideology ahead of the rule of law, like we've seen with the Ninth Circuit. I'm very familiar with them, having come from San Francisco. But all right, let me switch tacks here in terms of talking about leaks. Tremendous frustration in this country about the leaks. We got in big trouble here with one of our strongest and most important allies with the UK here in terms of leaks there, back and forth with the intelligence community. Why is this happening with this administration in a way that we have not seen before?
Well, there's two types of leaks going on here. There are the positional leaks among White House aides to bolster their own identity or positions, which are debilitating. I can't understand how and why people would do that. Matt and I never would do that in the Bush administration. And then there are the national security leaks that are designed. Absolutely, we would have been. And then the national security leaks that are coming from agencies, the State Department, the president's phone calls, the president's meetings with people. These are designed to hurt the president. But these national security leaks are particularly pernicious. What's come out now that's hurting our ally, the United Kingdom, should never, ever happen. And you'd think people would be smart enough and know better. And I hope we do find who they are.
No, you're absolutely right. But, you know, Matt, you bring up a great point. There has to be repercussions. The people that are doing this, you have to launch an investigation, bring in somebody from the outside if you want to determine who is doing this, because they are acting against the national security interests of the United States, and it shouldn't be tolerated. I think this president deserves better, and it seems to me that he should have people, Matt, that he can trust, that are loyal not only to this president, but to the flag, and aren't going to compromise this country or our allies.
You know, two things here. I agree with Ari that these leaks coming from the president's closest advisors out of the White House, they think they're helping their own reputations, but they're actually doing a disservice to the president. And the second thing is that when you see the fact that we have not filled as many of these jobs in these agencies, these political jobs, we don't have control on the system like previous presidents have, and it's imperative upon them and the president himself to make these choices. And we only need 50 votes in the Senate now. Let's push through. Let's get control of the bureaucracy, and let's fight back.
Absolutely. Real quick, Ari, get your thoughts just in terms of the late-breaking news about Jared Kushner.
Well, you know, I think Bob Mueller is going to pull his hair out, and he's going to start firing people on this investigative team if that's their style. Bob Mueller will never put up with this, the new head, the former head of the FBI, and the person leading the investigation. So I think these are holdovers who have been doing the work, and if they continue to unfairly name who they're talking to or who a probe is even just looking at, Mueller will put an end to it.
I agree.
Yeah, put an end to the witch hunt that's going on, that's for sure. Let justice prevail. Gentlemen, always a pleasure to talk to you tonight. Thanks for being on Hannity. And coming up, we're awaiting results in the Montana special election. Alicia Acuna is here next with a live update. Plus, Montana GOP candidate Greg Gianforte allegedly body slammed a reporter last night. You won't believe who the mainstream media is now trying to blame for it. Charlie Hurd and Jessica Tarlov will be here with reaction. And later, Sarah Carter and John Solomon from Circa are out with another explosive report tonight about the government violating your privacy rights. They'll both be Hannity. I'm Kimberly Guilfoyle, filling in for Sean. We are awaiting the results from the Montana special election, and the polls closed just a few minutes ago. Last night, the GOP candidate Greg Gianforte reportedly body slammed a Guardian reporter. Our very own Alicia Acuna and her crew witnessed this incident. She joins us now from Bozeman, Montana. Alicia, with the very latest.
Hi, Kimberly. Yes, and I can tell you just from looking at some of the election results coming in at 8% of the precincts reporting, Greg Gianforte, the Republican, is leading right now by 9 points. However, it is very early in the night. As you mentioned, the polls just closed, but it has been an incredibly tense 24 hours for everyone here in this state, especially for Greg Gianforte, because as you mentioned, we were standing in the room preparing for an interview with the GOP candidate when the Guardian reporter came in, Ben Jacobs, and started asking him questions. And when Gianforte pushed back and said he'll do it later, Jacobs persisted, and that's when Gianforte grabbed him, threw him to the ground, started punching him, telling him he was sick and tired of it. And at that point, that's when Jacobs tried to kind of get his composure, said his glasses were broken, and that he was calling the police. Kimberly, I can tell you, I was standing there 2 to 3 feet from these two men when this happened. I was also in the room with our photographer from Fox News, Keith Raley, as well as Faith Mangan. She's a Fox News Channel producer. We were shocked. None of us had ever seen anything like that in response to a reporter coming in and asking questions. Kimberly?
Unbelievable. Quite an incredible experience, and you were right there for it. So I'm glad that you told the truth and you came forward about it. Thank you so much, Alicia. Now, it didn't take long for the mainstream media to start pointing fingers, of course, for Gianforte's altercation. So who do you think they blamed? Watch this.
You can draw a straight line from Republican candidates thinking that sort of behavior is okay when you have Donald Trump berating reporters throughout the entire campaign, saying, suggesting terrible things, calling them, using the Stalinist term, enemy of the people.
Donald Trump is the role model in chief, and clearly you have a lot of people who have been modeling their behavior on Donald Trump, who has declared the media to be the enemy of the people.
You don't think it's because a guy who's in office now has said very horrible things about reporters and has said that the reporters are the enemy of the American people?
No,
I think that has nothing to do with anything, that people feel that they can get away with it, because I don't believe that you actually believe that.
And joining us now with reaction, Fox News contributors Charlie Hurt and Jessica Tarlev. Thanks for being with me tonight. So now there's 2/3 of the vote in from early voting, and you know the polls just closed minutes ago. How much do you think last night's incident is going to sway the results? I'll begin with you, Charlie.
Yeah, it looks like it, because there was so much early voting, that it'll have very little effect, if any. But the really sad thing about all of it is that if it had happened earlier, it might have helped the candidate, because people, their opinion of the press these days is so incredibly low. But just looking at that montage you just showed, you know, when you look at that stuff and you realize these are people who are supposed to be the first defenders of our free speech rights, and they don't know the difference between Donald Trump complaining about the press, ridiculing the press, and then some wacko who attacks a reporter and tries to beat him up during an interview. The fact that they don't realize the difference between those two things, I think, reveals exactly why so many Americans despise the press.
Yeah, it's a big problem, Jessica, because right away the narrative turned from personal responsibility about an individual choosing to take actions or acting out of temper or aggression to let's blame this and pin this on the POTUS.
Yeah, it was a hard sell, I think, for a lot of people, and for me as well there. This is no one but Gianforte's fault himself. He clearly lost his cool. There were people in the room. They saw it. They reported it accurately. As you said, it should have never happened. We should have heard from President Trump about this, not just no comment, but he should have said something, especially since he made robocalls about it. And they should be saying exactly what Charlie said, which is this guy is a wacko. And he's probably not fit for office, but with 65% of the vote in already and high Republican numbers, chances are that he is going to get elected. And we'll find out in a few hours about that. What I would say, though, to the liberals who are out there talking about this, and even Joe Scarborough, who now I guess is on the cusp more, is that, I give him the cusp, is that the argument to be made about what has happened in terms of demonizing the press is that there are more people defending Gianforte than there would have been maybe 4 years ago, 8 years ago, because of the attitude, the hostile attitude towards the press. It's given people an excuse for the inexcusable, and that's something that I think that can be tied back to Donald Trump, but certainly not the actions of a wacko.
So basically he's getting the whole thing of liberal bias and mainstream media run amok, witch hunts against President Trump, improper attribution, Charlie. So people are saying, wait a second, we can see how this guy might have snapped, like media derangement syndrome or something.
Sure. And if you look at some of the interviews that we've seen today of voters out there asked about this event, the two things that they say is, one is, well, you know, the guy probably had it coming or something like that. Or the other thing they say is, we don't believe what anybody is reporting, and so we don't think we have the full story, and so I'm going to keep an open mind, and I'm still supporting this guy. And both of those, I think, are pretty revealing. One, it reveals just how much disdain people have for the press, but the other is just how much nobody believes anything the press is reporting.
But Charlie, how much of that has to do with what Donald Trump did during the campaign and since he went into office with the demonization of the press? Well, they should believe that reporter. They should believe the audio. They should believe our reporters who were in the room. And that's the damage I believe POTUS has created.
I think it's too tenuous of a link. I mean, it's too stretched out for that. I mean, this guy's got to bear responsibility, Charlie.
Oh.
Agreed.
Okay, well,
everybody say they're sorry.
Let's concur on. We're so sorry. We're sorry we have to go to break. But coming up, Sarah Carter and John Solomon with Circa News have breaking news tonight just for you. According to their explosive report, the FBI allegedly shared intelligence about Americans with third parties and violated their constitutional rights. Sarah and John join us next to explain. And then later,
all people who cherish life must unite in finding, exposing, and removing these killers and extremists.
President Trump earlier today in Brussels called for extremists to be driven out. How was his message received? Rick Grinnell and Mercedes Schlapp. This is a Fox News Alert. I'm Kimberly Guilfoyle in for Sean, who is on vacation and will be back on Tuesday. Polls in the Montana special election closed at the top of the hour, and we are now awaiting results in that race. Also, tonight, another new and explosive report from Circa about your privacy rights. Sarah Carter and John Solomon just filed a new story with the headline, quote, "Declassified memos show FBI illegally shared spy data on Americans with private parties." Sarah Carter and John Solomon join us now with all the details. Sarah, good evening. I'll begin with you. If you can explain to the viewers how this process actually works with the FBI illegally sharing the information about Americans with third parties.
Yes, well, Kimberly, what we discovered through these documents, which were recently declassified by the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Court, was stunning. What they said was that the FBI was illegally sharing warrantless spy data. That means they did not have a warrant and they were sharing it with third parties. And in one case, they shared it with a party. They didn't explain who that party was, but it was a forbidden party, a party that was not allowed to have this type of raw intelligence. Another thing that they stated was that not only did they do that, but they were intercepting communications, attorney-client privileged communications, without oversight.
Wow.
So very little oversight. This didn't happen once or twice. This was hundreds of times. And another thing that they mentioned was that there was very little oversight overall in what the FBI was accessing through the NSA database. And I think this is very concerning because this is the first time that we've actually heard that the FBI, not just the NSA, which John and I broke just several days ago,
right.
That the FBI itself was also dabbing into the database and moving raw intelligence around that actually affected our Fourth Amendment rights and our privacy rights as Americans.
It's really unbelievable. This is an explosive story. It's really a bombshell in terms of the flagrant violation of people's privacy rights. I mean, John, were you shocked really at just sort of the extent of this and the far reach?
I'd like to say I was, but I'm not. And the more that we dig into the spying that went on in the Obama administration and these expansion of powers, the more we see that the Fourth Amendment has been abused or certainly put at risk. And I think one of the things that you ask a lot of times, we hear a lot of talk in Washington about all these leaks. Where do they come from? Well, the more you pass this stuff down, it goes from the NSA to the FBI, then the FBI to private citizens. That's how you're going to get a trail of leaks. And I think that if they want to stop this, they've got to tighten it up.
What do they do, Sarah, though, to tighten it up? John brings up a great point because everybody at home's frustrated. Like, really, they get this in check. What is going on that people literally don't feel that there's going to be any repercussion, any kind of criminal or civil repercussion for what they're doing, violating the laws here and violating the privacy rights of American citizens?
Well, there's a couple of things that they can do, Kimberly. We know right now that they're going to launch a massive investigation into the leaks. It's going to be very interesting to see where these leaks came from. I believe that some of these leaks came from very high up because some of the information, for example, when you're dealing with Lieutenant General Michael Flynn, that would have been a very small number of people that would have had access to those tech cuts. Now, if they talked about it and put it in emails, then that leak expansion could be a little bit wider, a little bit bigger, but still, according to my sources, it's very narrow. Another thing that I believe can be done is that Congress right now is planning on investigating this. Remember, Section 702 is coming up for review. This FISA Section 702, which allows the NSA to basically collect information on non-U.S. citizens overseas, and those incidental intercepts are happening where they're collecting Americans' information as well, is coming for review at the end of the year. Daryl Issa, Trent Franks, others who've spoken to us say that they're going to look at this law. They're going to, and some of them aren't even going to vote for it unless it's revised.
Well, it has to be. I mean, this is a real big problem, especially when you look back at the time frame and the chronology, John, in terms of how far back this goes and the pervasiveness of it.
It does. 2011, Barack Obama changed the rules, and ever since that time, we saw a tripling of the sort of spying on Americans going on, and now we see these leaks and violations. And I think an unusual coalition is going to come together. You're going to see the ACLU and conservatives agreeing on something for the first time and trying to fix this when this bill comes up for renewal this fall.
Okay, how quick do you think the turnaround on this in terms of being able to do something to stop the leaks?
Well, they have to put someone, they have to arrest someone, right? They have to find someone and make an example. That's the fastest way to stop a leaking problem. But you just look, every day there are 10, 20 leaks. Even the British are mad at us.
Well, the president's certainly vowing to do something about this, and I think he's going to get to the bottom of it. Sarah and John, thank you so much. Keep up with the great work at Circa. Coming up, we are awaiting the results from the Montana special election. Polls closed in the state just about 30 minutes ago. But first,
all people who cherish life must unite in finding, exposing, and removing these killers and extremists.
And that was President Trump earlier today speaking in front of NATO members about the need to eradicate extremists. Rick Grinnell and Mercedes Schlapp, we are awaiting the results from the Montana special election where the polls closed just over 30 minutes ago. But first, President Trump was at the new NATO headquarters today in Brussels, where he once again called for terrorists to be wiped out. Watch this.
All people who cherish life must unite in finding, exposing, and removing these killers and extremists. And yes, losers. They are losers. Wherever they exist in our societies, we must drive them out and never, ever let them back in.
Joining me now with reaction is former spokesman for the U.S. ambassador to the UN, Rick Grinnell, and Fox News contributor Mercedes Schlapp. Thank you for being here with me tonight. Very busy news night. So today, President Trump spoke about the need to drive out the extremists. Do you think, Rick, that members of NATO are doing enough to combat radical Islamic terror?
Well, clearly what NATO needs to do is have a new mission, and that new mission needs to include dealing with international terrorism. We have a capabilities gap at NATO right now where some countries are coming under the NATO umbrella and they're not really able to give militarily. So they're coming under the umbrella to get the protection. And what we need to do is work on the capabilities gap so that every country is pulling their weight, not just paying the bills, which is extremely important and should be a priority as well. But the capabilities gap is a real problem at NATO, and that's got to be solved as well.
How do you fix that, though? Because you're dead on about this. There's really a capabilities problem. But what are the steps to even try to rectify that, Rick?
Well, look, I'm going to throw something out here that's a little bit crazy about NATO. But if we're going to talk about terrorism and we're going to talk about teaching other countries how to deal with terrorists, and we have a capabilities gap at NATO, why not make Israel part of NATO? They are one of the countries that every country could learn from in terms of how do you deal with terrorists. And I think NATO's got to be thinking differently about these issues. If you're going to make NATO, of course, blocking Russia, that's a standard, that's a 100% number one priority. But we also have to update its mission, and we have to think differently about NATO. One of the other things, too, Kimberly, is that we should not have countries calculating their pensions towards defense spending. That's a social program. They're important, but it shouldn't calculate towards your 2% of defense spending when you talk about military pensions.
Such a great point. Now, Mercedes, what do you think? Because that's an interesting, outside the box in terms of the thinking there to say, okay, let's bring in Israel.
But we don't even have to think outside the box. There's a bigger issue here, which Chancellor Merkel spoke about today with her little friend, President Obama, where they talked about open borders. This is an issue that obviously in many of these countries in Europe, that they're not willing to accept the reality that if they hone in on an agenda where it is about open borders and not controlling the migrants who are coming in and the refugees who are coming in, not knowing who is coming into their country, that is a fundamental problem. NATO can't solve the problem. The United States can't solve that problem. And this is why if they can't track these individuals, for example, in the case of the Manchester bomber who was traveling to Libya, who was going to Syria, where there are these red flags everywhere, but they viewed him as sort of a minor figure and not an immediate threat. I think that there's a very clear reality right now that if the European leaders do not take this seriously in terms of understanding who is coming in and out of their country, that I think is a bigger issue, Kimberly.
Yeah, what about that, Rick, in terms of their own individual and personal responsibility as countries that need to be part of the solution here and have some skin in the game to say, we're going to do everything we can. We take this problem seriously. We're going to pay our dues, and we're actually going to do something about this.
Look, every single country enforces its own immigration laws. That's just a fact. Sometimes the United States is the only country that gets criticized for trying to enforce its immigration law. But if you look at the real details here, we're the most generous when it comes to allowing people to come here as permanent residents. More than 1 million people every single year become permanent residents in the United States. We also allow more than 4 million people to come here as students for a longer term stay, and 42 million people have visitors visas And so when you look at the numbers, the United States is by far the most generous when it comes to allowing people into our country. We just need to enforce our immigration laws and have extreme vetting so that we know who's coming in. It's not a crazy idea.
No, it's not. Mercedes, when you look at this and just the, kind of the juxtaposition, especially with this timing, right now what's going on, President Trump's calling for that extreme vetting that Rick has just mentioned right here. America wants to secure its borders. America wants to have legal immigration, people actually complying with the laws that are on the books, respecting the Constitution. What's wrong with this? When all of a sudden did the United States become the bad guy in all of this?
Well, what's been fascinating to watch is obviously how the courts have ruled on the travel ban for the president. Clearly what they're doing is rather than focusing in on what the words are within the law, they've decided to go back to President Trump's campaign statements and use that as part of their argument to uphold the injunction on the travel ban. But here's the reality that we have, which is the fact that you saw former FBI Director James Comey, former Obama administration officials basically very concerned about the fact that you can't vet individuals coming into the United States from Syria. There is not U.S. soldiers on the ground that basically are collecting the information of the local population. So it makes it incredibly difficult to ensure that people who are, as we know, ISIS says that they want to infiltrate through the refugee program. It makes it very difficult, I think, for the United States to handle these situations when you're talking about countries of concern, which is what President Obama pushed through in terms of these 7 or 6 countries that President Obama used in his in his travel ban.
Yeah, absolutely. I want to shift gears a little bit here because we are actually going to extend into the next hour because we're awaiting results in the Montana special election, and the Associated Press is reporting it is a tight race indeed. And after reports of last night's altercation between Gianforte and a reporter, how do we think that might impact the results? So I want to just get your take on this, Rick and Mercedes. I mean, Rick, obviously this is being closely watched with the breaking news of that physical altercation. This is a seat that matters to Republicans. What are you expecting?
Well, look, I think that if everybody was voting after they heard this news, we'd have a different result. But I hear 2/3 of the voters had already voted in early voting. It's one of the issues why I've been a part of a lot of campaigns, and it's one of the issues why early voting it obviously has its advantages, but in certain situations it has its disadvantages. When new information comes out, when some sort of scandal erupts, if you voted too early, then you don't have the benefit of this knowledge. So I think this race would be very different if we had everybody voting at the same time after the fact on election day. I mean, clearly Alicia Acuña's first-hand account to me made the difference. She was there, she saw what happened, and I just think that it's unacceptable to ever put your hands around anyone for any reason.
Right, and there's been a lot of equivocation and explaining back and forth and finger pointing about this issue. Mercedes, obviously this is an important seat to the Republicans, but you can't discount what's happened here. And as Rick, points out, there was eyewitness, percipient witnesses right there to say exactly what happened. And you heard the report from our very own Alicia Acuña, one of our camera people and also a producer that was there that saw what transpired. There was also some issue as to whether or not there was an inconsistent statement, put out by Gianforte's press team, on this, Mercedes.
I do believe that if Gianforte would have come out with an apology early on, I think it could have definitely been to his benefit. I think for him to wait and not state an apology but kind of push back on the argument was weak. It didn't help him. Now, at the end, I do believe this is, this is a safe Republican seat, although I believe right now it's a very tight race based on the shock value on the last, 24 hours of what we've seen. I do believe Gianforte will win, but I do believe that it's been unfortunate circumstances, and really I think it's a lesson to candidates all out there. Even when you know, the temperature is high in a political campaign and there's tension, the last thing you need to do is body slam a reporter. There's enough body slamming that's going on in Congress. Use your energy for fighting the Democrats in Congress, not going after a reporter.
Yeah, I mean, Rick, this is really unbelievable. Talk about like a fumble at, you know, first and goal here. I mean, really a big problem. And by the way, here's what bothers me the most about it is that people are actually trying to tie this to President Trump and say that this is his fault, that he created this narrative, that he has encouraged this kind of language, behavior, assaultive conduct against members of the press. That to me is just like, wow, astonishing.
I think it's astonishing, too. And, you know, the seat is going to be a problem for Republicans if Gianforte wins. It's going to be a problem for Speaker Paul Ryan. I think that it would be best if the NRCC and others came out and just simply said, this is unacceptable. Violence is never okay. Distance themselves from this before he, you know, before people started voting. One of the best things that could happen for the Republicans would be for him to lose and then they not have this around their neck as he comes into Congress.
I disagree with you. You know how it is with these members of Congress. They bundle up. No one will remember who Gianforte is in 2 years. You know, if he's going to be he'll try to do his work as being a congressman of Montana, but we'll forget his name soon enough. But I disagree. I think it's important for the Republicans to win this seat. And I think, you know, it was an unfortunate incident. It should have never happened. You know, I wish he would have apologized early on, but we need the Republicans in Congress in order to stop the Democrats. That's clearly the case in point.
I think we need. Well, I certainly want the Republicans to win. That's not my point. But I think it would be different if he had some sort of a financial scandal, or if he was, you know, caught doing something where he had to come out and admit an error.
But he's got a criminal case now pending. That's the problem. And the only thing that people might forget about,
violence.
It's physical violence. It's assaultive conduct. And by the way, what's the backstory on this? He says, you guys are always doing this. What, asking questions about the budget? This is a little bit like, especially because you can hear the tape. Maybe the one thing that's going to save him is there isn't an actual video of him going honey badger. I don't know. I mean, because if there was a video, we'd be seeing it every day.
It would be like the
Alicia's a pretty credible reporter.
Yeah, well, there you go.
Alicia's a pretty credible reporter, and she said, you know, hands around the neck.
Away. Exactly, and the glasses are broken. All right, unacceptable conduct, no doubt. Results coming in. I will ask you guys to stand by because we're going all the way. Coming up, we are awaiting results from the Montana special election. We will be live until midnight covering the race. Anthony Scaramucci will join us later tonight. Plus, a Gold Star mom who supported President Trump during the election is out with a brand new book just in time for Memorial Day. Awaiting results from the Montana special election. We will be live tonight until midnight covering the results. But first, my next guest is a Gold Star mom who supported President Trump during the election. She now has a brand new book out just in time for Memorial Day called World Changer, a mother's story, the unbreakable spirit of U.S. Navy SEAL Erin Carson Vaughn. Karen Vaughn, my friend, joins me now tonight to tell us more about this important book and her son, his legacy. Erin.
Yeah.
Wonderful for you to be here tonight with us. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
We've known each other now, what, for over
5.5 years now.
Absolutely.
Yes.
So you've been working on this book. And tell us first a little bit about, and I know about him, but to share with the viewers about your son.
Erin was just a remarkable human being. By the time he was 8 years old, he knew exactly what he was created to be. He wanted to be a Navy SEAL, and he overcame unimaginable odds to achieve that dream, Kimberly, and unfortunately lost his life in the midst of that dream at the pinnacle of his career, at the pinnacle of his life, 30 years old.